So good morning, everybody. My name is Maggie Dixon. I am the Home Visiting Coordination Initiative, or HVCI, Development Coordinator at Prevent Child Abuse New York. And I'm so pleased to offer this opportunity for you this morning. We host a monthly webinar series, which is an opportunity for folks to join us for a forum for conversation and learning. Just a brief housekeeping item, please remember to mute yourselves and place any questions or interact in the chat room. I will be sending a follow-up email after today with a link to a survey. We collect data as a part of the Birth Through 5 Preschool Development Grant project that the HVCI is funded under. So please remember to fill that out as it helps us continue this webinar series. There are closed captioning services enabled. So if you navigate to the bottom of your screen and hover over the little CC button, you should be able to see subtitles. So we are so pleased to be joined this morning by Maria and Stan from Ciccatelli Associates to provide us an overview session of engaging men and fathers in early childhood services and home visiting. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them, and please just a reminder to place all questions in the chat. We'll be facilitating throughout the session. And thank you very much for joining us, Marie and Stan.
Thank you, Maggie. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Engaging Men and Fathers. My name is Maria Dentino, and my pronouns are she and her. I'm the Nutrition Training and Development Specialist for CAI, and I'm a registered dietitian and certified lactation counselor. I've been working in community health for over 14 years, with most of that time in the WIC program. This topic is near and dear to my heart, as I experienced firsthand from the first moments after my first child's birth, how crucial my husband's support was. We had an incredibly difficult time with breastfeeding, and my husband played a really pivotal role in coaching my infant son to learn how to nurse properly. And I've been privileged to witness many of the benefits of involved fathering that we'll be discussing in a few minutes today in my own family, and I don't take that for granted. I'm really happy to be here with all of you today, and so that we can talk about how we might best support men and fathers in our work. And I'm thrilled to be joined by my co-trainer, Stan Martin, and I'll let him introduce himself now.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Maria. It's a pleasure to be here. Once again, Stan the Man Martin from Buffalo, New York. I got the name Stan the Man from my days of playing basketball as a student athlete in high school as well as in university. So it kind of stuck with me over the years, but I'm very happy to be here with you all today. And my pronouns are he and him. I identify myself as a Black male. And I think that's very important as it relates to our conversation today. I'm also a father, a son, a brother, or uncle, and also a basketball coach as well. So part-time. So really looking forward to being here with you all and having this discussion. So I've been with the organization 11 years, and it's good to be back home in Buffalo, New York, doing some very important work. So thank you very much.
So we want to start off, before we go any further today, we want to name that as we talk about men and fathers, we're talking about all types of father figures. So men raising children can be biological, adoptive, foster, or stepfathers, as well as grandfathers, uncles, big brothers, godfathers. We're defining father broadly as the male or males identified as most involved in caregiving and committed to the well-being of the child, regardless of the living situation, marital status, or biological relation. He may or may not have legal custody and may reside with his children or not. And also when we say male, we're talking about anyone who identifies as male. If you haven't already, we would love for you to put some more about yourself in the chat. We'd love to hear your agency, your role, where you're joining us from. And while you're all doing that, I'll share a little bit more about the organization that Stan and I are proud to represent. So we are from CAI, or Ciccatelli Associates Incorporated. We're a nonprofit founded in 1979. So we've been doing this work for over 40 years. And we provide training, technical assistance, research, and other support to healthcare and social services agencies. We help strengthen the capacity of organizations to improve the health and well-being of marginalized communities. And we focus in a lot of different areas, including adolescent health, maternal and child health, mental health, sexual and reproductive health, substance use, tobacco use, HIV and STIs. We have a lot of different areas that we specialize in. And just a quick review of Zoom features, in case you are not familiar with those. You can mute and unmute yourself using the icon at the bottom left of your screen. In our image, it looks like a headset, but on my screen, it looks like a microphone. So it depends on once you get your audio connected, what it looks like. And we ask that you just unmute yourself only if you're going to speak, and then immediately mute yourself again in an effort to reduce any background noise. We would love for you to share your video as much as possible to help with engagement and interaction. We love to see you like we would if we were all together in person. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat box. If you click on chat, the chat box will show up on the right-hand side of your dashboard, and please don't hesitate to send us a message if you're having any issues. And then raise your hand. If you want to communicate with the group or give feedback, you can raise your hand. That function is found under the reactions button. And this is how things might look on a mobile version. So you can see there is the icon for the chat box. You can see that on the right-hand side of your screen. I'm going to turn it over to Stan, who's going to go over our objectives with you.
All right. Thank you, Maria. And thank you, everyone for, identifying yourselves in the chat box, letting us know in terms of your organization and where you're from. It looks like we have a wide audience from across the state. So, that's very exciting to see. I also see some names and organizations of people who I think I'm going to follow up locally here in Buffalo and Niagara Falls, and maybe even Rochester as well. So if you're just joining us, once again, please feel comfortable to share your contact information, your name, your organization, who you are in the chat boxes. It's nice to network, after we have these conversations. So one of the things we like to do, or we like to move into, is you might be saying, well, what's the goal? What's the objectives for the day? And Maria and I, as well as Maggie, one of the things we want you to be able to walk away is that, to recognize the importance of men and fathers in the health and well-being of families. That is so important. And also to understand the barriers, to father engagement. Sometimes, we see things, or we have an idea, or we assume what's happening within a relationship, or within a family, or within a child. But you know what? There are some things that might be underlying that we might not be aware of, or that we, need to consider, as we start to work with families and to engage and build rapport and trust, which is so important, in this space. And then also we want to make sure that we leave some time that you're able to strategize and ways to engage men and fathers, in your programming, as we're, sharing information and dialogue with one another. If you have some helpful hints, some tips that you have, tested, that are, have been tried and true, I want to encourage you to, share that information as well. Next slide, please. So, and then in order to do that, it's very important that, we create an environment, in which everyone feels safe, and, that everyone feels comfortable sharing their thoughts and ideas. And one of the ways that we want to do this, you can let us know if these are group agreements, just in the interest of time, if they resonate with you. We want to encourage you to participate. This workshop is designed to be interactive. Even though we're in this quagmire space, this virtual world today, due to all that is happening, all that is going on, we still want to make sure that this is interactive, and that those same principles, if we were in face-to-face, that they, apply. Try and minimize, any distractions, if at all possible. Some of you might be working from home. That's a little easier said than done, if you have children or just other things going on. But try and participate, as much as you can. And we also want to foster an environment that creates, tri-directional learning, whereas though you're learning from us, we're learning from you, and more importantly, that peer-to-peer approach, whereas though you're able to learn from one another. And kind of like that old Aretha Franklin song, I don't want to be dating myself, but I grew up on Aretha Franklin a little bit. that respect factor, respecting one another. In this space, we can agree to respect one another and use respectful language. And, we can even agree to disagree. That sometimes happens. Everyone is coming in with different experiences and opinions. And the more we can be open to everyone, the more we can learn, from each other as well. And then also self-care. There's many things going on, so do what you need to do to take care of yourself. You need to self-manage, go to the restroom, the bathroom, or what have you, or take a drink of water, or, grab a coffee or tea, certainly feel free to do so, or some orange juice or whatever, you might, prefer. And if you have an urgent call or, something that you need to, take care of in the space, we ask that you, just do what you need to do. You can put your camera off, but you'll make sure that you remain on mute. Then when you come back and things are settled, just rejoin the training as before. So we're gonna give you a chance to test your Zoom features. If you're okay with this, if you're cool with this, you're gonna utilize your reaction buttons at the bottom and give me a thumbs up. That would be great. I want to see this. Okay, I think it's Brightside. Thank you, Brightside, for getting us started. All right. Or you just want to use the thumbs up sign, old school, old style, that'll work too. So, all right. Thank you, Renee. Appreciate you. All right, Brenton. All right. So that being said, we're gonna rock and roll, hip and hop, and maybe do a little R&B. I'm gonna turn it back over to you, Maria.
We would love to hear from you. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yep. I'm gonna do this one last activity. Now, this activity here that we're gonna ask you all to do, all right, I want you to share one word that describes your most recent experience working with the Father, okay? So all right, oh wow, this is blowing up. We got determined, we got frustrated, all right, we got brief, got engaging, okay, all right. Impactful, rewarding, encouraging, committed, okay, discouraged, supportive. All right, let's keep it coming. Let's keep them coming. All right, proud, brief. Okay, removed. Okay, inspiring and discouraging. Thank you, Michelle. All right, for giving us 2 there. Yep. Okay. So yeah. All right. So let's keep them coming, and we got desiring, we got motivated and supportive, we got loving. Okay. Okay. Unengaged. All right. So yeah. So these are all feelings, these are all, some emotions, that oftentimes, we ourselves, when we're working in this space, or working in this environment, saying that we may sometimes feel, and even, bi-directional as well. Sometimes fathers might feel that same way about us. But what we want to do right now during the time that we're going to be spending together, once again, we want to, identify not just the barriers, but also what are some solutions that can help us to, once again, build that rapport, build that trust, that can really help us to increase the overall wellness and being, of the family or those that we're working with. So, okay. Maria, I think now I'm going to turn it over to you. Do you have any thoughts or comments, anything you want to add?
No, I love we got a whole mix in there. And
Right.
we've got a lot of honest responses, and I appreciate that.
Okay. All right, take it away.
Okay. So in this next section, we're going to be looking at why men and fathers are so important to families. So we're going to launch a series of polls. Each is going to have a statement, and we want you to vote in the poll on whether you think this statement is a myth, like this unicorn I've got on the screen, or a fact, like this rhinoceros on the screen. After each one, we're going to talk about what the research says about that statement. And just a reminder, polls are anonymous, so we're not going to see which way you answer. So go ahead and take a guess. All right, Maggie, can we launch our first poll? The first one. Go ahead.
Yes, Maria, and I'm just hopping in with a brief technical thing. We had someone from our staff join who is also on the Zoom account and now has access to the polls, and I do not. So
Okay.
Geraldine, if you are on, could you go ahead and launch poll number 1? It should be question 1. And if not, I'm happy to copy and paste, and we'll pivot and use the chat.
I see it. It's there.
Perfect.
So when fathers are involved during pregnancy, there's a lower risk of infant mortality. Is that a myth or is that a fact, do you think? Go ahead and vote. We've got almost half people voted already, so great job. Give you a little bit longer. All right. Let's go ahead and end the poll and share the results. All right, so it looks like 83% of folks said fact and 17% said myth. Let me show you the answer. So this is a fact. So when fathers are involved during pregnancy, there is a lower risk of infant mortality. So we know that father involvement during pregnancy is correlated with mothers being 1.5 times more likely to receive first trimester prenatal care. And it's correlated with reductions in prematurity and infant mortality. So we know that based on research findings, fathers indirectly impact fetal development, birth weight, preterm birth. And this is proposed to be primarily through their effect on maternal well-being, stress levels, and behaviors during pregnancy. We know that when fathers or partners are involved in support of the mother during pregnancy, mothers tend to smoke less, drink alcohol, and use illicit drugs less, exercise more, and eat healthier when pregnant. And when fathers are not involved, pregnancy outcomes are at higher risk for negative birth outcomes. All right, so let's go on to number 2. So this one is fathers don't have much influence over family decisions. Can we go ahead and launch that one? Actually, I think I was able to do so. You should all be seeing that now. All right, people are voting quick. Great job. You guys are on the ball. Got more than 3/4 of people have voted so far. I'll give you a few more seconds.
While we're polling, can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
So in the chat box, I put, did the response to number 1 also impact abortion rates? I was just waiting to hear, everything that you had outlined, and abortion rates weren't in there. So I was wondering if there was a correlation there as well.
I'm not sure. It's not something that I saw when I was reviewing the research, but something we could definitely look into. And Claudia says in the chat, isn't the second question really dependent on the relationship? Yes, definitely. So let's end that poll and talk about that further. So we have 94% said myth and 6% said fact. So yeah, there's a lot of nuance here, right, in the relationship, and we're going to be touching on that a little bit later. So it's a myth. Obviously, fathers have a lot of influence over family decisions, especially in areas like parenting, discipline, safe sleep, breastfeeding, and family planning. For time's sake, we're going to talk about just a couple of these, breastfeeding and family planning. So we know fathers can play a critical role in supporting breastfeeding. Mothers are more likely to initiate and continue breastfeeding when the father has a positive attitude towards breastfeeding and provides practical support. Study findings indicate that when fathers are on board, they have a positive influence on the decision of mothers to initiate and continue breastfeeding, and they can encourage that attitude towards breastfeeding and provide practical support to moms to help them breastfeed longer. Studies have shown that when both mothers and fathers receive breastfeeding education prenatally, rates of initiation and exclusive breastfeeding are higher than when just mothers get that kind of information. And then as far as family planning, the whole concept that family planning as women's business is an outdated notion for sure. We know that men have an important role to play in family planning and can influence contraception use. Their involvement in reproductive health planning is crucial to reducing unintended pregnancies and increasing use of birth control and protection from STIs, which can impact pregnancy outcomes when contracted by the mother. All right, let's look at the third one. So our third poll is fathers have an important role to play in the family's mental health. And I see some discussion in the chat. We're already bumping into some of the barriers, right, of fathers being involved. So we have everyone in agreement on this one so far. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. Of course, 100% of you said this is a fact. So I want to talk about 3 different ways that fathers are involved or play an important role in mental health. So it's probably not shocking that a father's health and well-being can influence the health and well-being of his children or the children he's caring for. But let's look a little bit further at what the literature says. So there's multiple ways that fathers influence the mental health of the family. Number 1, present and involved fathers positively influence their children's mental health. So we know that father involvement in their early childhood years, meaning that they're caring for their children, playing with them, communicating with them, is associated with positive psychological and behavioral outcomes in both childhood and adulthood. Although most studies don't differentiate the benefits of having 2 parents from a specifically male presence as the second parent. Second, we know that present involved fathers can help mitigate the effects of maternal depression on children. So we know that maternal depression affects between 1 in 5 and 1 in 7 mothers, and it has negative impacts on children. But when fathers are involved, it can help compensate for that negative influence of maternal depression and thereby reduce the risk of problem behaviors in the child. And then lastly, when fathers are struggling with their own mental health, there are adverse effects on children. We know that fathers with depression report lower quality relationships with the mother of their child. They're less likely to play and spend time with their kids. They're less likely to have affectionate contact with their kids, like hugging and cuddling, and are less likely to co-parent in general. They're more likely to spank their infants and less likely to read to them. So fathers need mental health support too, not just for their children's sake, but of course, because everybody, parent or not, deserves to not be suffering and things like that. Okay. Let's go on to number 4. We'll go ahead and launch that poll. It is the ways fathers play with children are different than the ways mothers play with children. Whoops. And I just gave you the answer. That was a little gimme. I was trying to read in the chat and click the wrong spot. I'm just looking at this discussion you all are having in the chat. These are making a lot of good points.
Yeah, yes, they're blowing up this chat box.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, we'll give you a couple more seconds. Let me just get my Zoom windows rearranged here. Okay, let's go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So 86% said fact and 14% said myth. So this I thought was super interesting. The ways that fathers and mothers play with their children are different, and each of them have their own benefits. So fathers are more likely to play with their infants than mothers, and fathers' play tends to be more stimulating, vigorous, and arousing for the infant. Studies have shown fathers play with their infants in more intense ways, which could encourage children's exploration and independence, whereas the less intensive interactions that mothers use provide safety and balance. So both have a role to play and they don't duplicate each other. They complement each other. All right, and then last, poll 5, we can go ahead and launch that. is mothers influence language development more than fathers. There we go. Got that up for you. Go ahead. What do you think? Myth or fact? This one might have the most mixed results so far. Go ahead and get your votes in if you have thoughts. If you haven't yet, I'd love to hear from you. All right, we'll go ahead and end this one. Share the results. So Bentley says in the chat, mothers usually speak and exchange dialogue more with babies than most fathers. So some of us have heard that women tend to use more words per day. I've heard the studies that say, you know, that when a woman is involved in a healthcare interaction, whether she's the patient or the provider, that more information is communicated. So I thought that this was very interesting that actually this is a myth. We can't say that mothers influence language development more than fathers, because while mothers expose their infants to more language, one study showed that at age 3, father-child communication was a significant and unique predictor of advanced language development. And we think this is because mothers tend to tailor their word choice to the child's known vocabulary, where fathers are more likely to introduce new words. We also know it's not just language development that's influenced. Father involvement is important to a child's overall cognitive development from childhood throughout adolescence. And children whose fathers are absent tend to have poorer outcomes in school and are less likely to graduate from high school. Oh, I see in the chat, A.L. Myers is saying the lower voice of a father can be heard more distinctly in the womb, or at least the baby responds. Yes. Interesting. And Andrew's saying words per day is socioeconomic driven. See the research. Yeah, good point. Thank you. So I want to kind of summarize this section. We can take down the poll. So we know that involved fathers have an important role to play. Involved fathers are sensitive, warm, close, friendly, supportive, affectionate, nurturing, encouraging, comforting, and accepting. And they have a unique positive influence on their children's social, emotional, and cognitive outcomes. And also, it's not just the kids who benefit when fathers are involved. Studies also find that mothers and fathers themselves benefit when fathers are involved in child rearing. So you all started to bring up some of the barriers in the chat. We're going to start moving into looking at those barriers a little bit further. Stan's going to take you into that section.
All right. Thank you, Maria, and thank you, everyone, for this robust conversation. You know, in the chat box, it's really, you know, exhilarating, in my opinion. And you know, when we were putting together this, you know, this presentation, this workshop, you know, we've divided, you know, the barriers up into, you know, categories, you know, because, you know, there are many categories or many things that are impacting, you know, fathers' involvement or what have you. We recognize that, and it's not one issue in particular, but, you know, it can be many, you know, it can be very complex, you know. So even though we've identified 3 particular areas that we tried to break them down in, just recognize that some of these can be, you know, in other silos or in other areas as well, across multiple areas, I should say. And I really want to just highlight and lift up, I think, hopefully I'm not butchering the name, it's Licia. Licia had a comment in the chat box that I really want to kick off this section with. And Licia wrote that the ousting of fathers from family has so many components and different ways it has been accomplished. It was only a matter of time before the intentional father ousting moved outside of race and poverty to all fathers. So I just wanted to lift that up. And, you know, sometimes we focus in on race or we focus in on poverty. And as Alicia, hopefully I'm pronouncing correctly, you know, she pointed out how, you know, how this can impact all fathers regardless of race or socioeconomic status. So, you know, that being said, moving forward, one of the areas we wanted to hone in on is the individual behaviors. You know, and these were, like I said, these are just some that, you know, came to mind or to the forefront for us. You might have some others that, you know, you might want to lift up, you know, in the chat box, and please feel free to do so. One of the barriers that we, in terms of the individual, is the adverse experiences, you know, of fathers or, you know, men themselves. You know, fathers may have, they themselves, as we talked about, might have some physical or some mental health issues that, you know, they're dealing with. Sometimes, you know, substance use is an issue that can impact, you know, their ability to be involved. Employment, something that we don't oftentimes think about is also military, you know, deployment, and even sometimes current or past, you know, experiences with the law, you know, that may result into jail or incarceration. They might be in transitional housing, homelessness, you know, which can be an issue. And also, you know, some of their own past experiences, you know, having the lack of or the absence of a male figure, you know, in their life, you know, when they were a child, you know. So those are just some of the things that, you know, from an individual perspective that might, you know, get in the way, you know, and that can also, someone is a new father, you know, perhaps, you know, the lack of confidence, you know, that, you know, he might, you know, be experiencing or have, that can create a barrier in their willingness to be engaged. And negative perception, you know, one of the things we don't talk about, or we don't also oftentimes look at, fathers or males or men might have a negative perception of the organizations or the agencies and or even the person, you know, that they're communicating and working with. So, and I think last but not least, one of the things that was highlighted in the conversations thus far was that belief that the father's role is secondary. You know, we're really dismantling, you know, a lot of the stereotypes and some of the stigma, you know, surrounding, you know, fathers being engaged or men or males being involved. And I'm looking up in the chat box. Some of you guys are getting ahead of us. This is the advanced class. Someone wrote, Nancy wrote, culturally, some fathers have to move for work and family is separated. That is definitely an issue. And Malada stated that many of my mom's boyfriends dispute the paternity. Some for cultural reasons do not want dad to be present at the survey. Some just don't know who their father is. And sometimes that is one's experience, absolutely. So it goes back to my comment of looking not just what we see on the surface, sometimes there are things underlying and underneath. But I think that's a nice segue to our next slide, if you could please. Just go to the next slide, which, you know, we're going to talk about some of the family barriers, you know, in terms of, I think we're highlighting the fact that, you know, proximity to the child. Fathers may not live near the child, which may prevent fathers from being engaged, you know, in their children's life. Okay, I know for me personally, for at one point in time when a relationship that I was in, and, you know, my son, I lived in the US and his mom, you know, lived in Canada. And we had, you know, decided to go our separate ways, but because of the fact that I was living in the US, she was living in Canada, that was a major barrier. You know, that was, you know, an obstacle, regardless of my willingness to, you know, try and, you know, send birthday cards, you know, birthday parties, or be, you know, involved at, you know, different holidays. We didn't have Zoom back then, but we had FaceTime, you know. So, but really trying to, you know, be present and be active, you know, that was, you know, that was my way of trying to close the gap. So those issues are real. And sometimes the relationship with the mother, as many of you have pointed out, the relationship with the mother can be a barrier to father's involvement. And sometimes the court system, as someone said, needs to be schooled. You know, I think that was in the chat box, that was the term. You know, the court system sometimes, you know, is more favorable towards the female or towards the mom. And that is, in my experience, that's a reality that we sometimes, as fathers, as men, that we're faced with, and we have to be resilient and trying to overcome. And because there is some gatekeeping that does take place, and the mother oftentimes serves as a gatekeeper, and the father has to be invited depending upon how she might be feeling, or depending upon what's the program, culture, and philosophy is surrounding engaging fathers in this work moving forward. Next slide. Okay, as we look at some of these community, cultural, and environmental barriers, and I'm going to highlight the fact that traditional attitudes towards masculinity, can be a barrier, or even cultural and environmental barriers. So when we're talking about this, men are often socialized to look at problems on our own. Okay, just handle it. Take it like a man. Just deal with it. And if you ask for help, if you're looking to reach out, look for services, that sometimes can be misconstrued as not being a man, or machismo. Okay, and that's the reality that some men go through. Men tend to have limited support networks that they can rely on. One of the things I know that when I was separated from my child due to the proximity issue was that I really had to develop my own network, my own group, seek out other fathers, who had similar experiences, or just some of the thoughts and attitudes and feelings that we all were going through. And that was very helpful. But oftentimes we don't find those networks, those services, in our community. There are many cultural variations and perceptions of fatherhood and fathers and communities, and we learned that many myths still exist. For example, excuse me, men of color, African Americans, Latinos, from poor communities in general, don't want to be involved. Quote unquote, they're deadbeat's dad. All right, and that's not true. There are a lot of men. There are a lot of fathers who want to be involved, but because of circumstances, it prevent them from being as involved or as engaged as they would like to. Okay, and we've already talked a little bit about the incarceration and the poverty piece, and the assumptions that because of these factors, fathers are less important, in terms of raising your child, and that all a child needs is just one parent. And I think that what I'm seeing in this space is that that's not true. It's a 50-50 shared responsibility, a shared role. Okay. Next slide, please. So we talked a little bit about the individual, we talked a little bit about the family, and we also talked a little bit about the environmental, the community. It's very important, especially for that fathers be involved, or that when we're looking at our agency, our policies, that we're not putting up roadblocks, that we're not putting up barriers. That the environment that we're working in, we have to look at and ask ourselves: do we have just posters and brochures with women, or do we have posters and brochures with family, or do we have posters and brochures that speaks to men in general? All right, so now that creates an environment where fathers feel welcome. They feel that they're that in some cases that like they're recognized, that you see me. All right, that you acknowledge me. And then in addition to that, when we were talking earlier about one word that described your last interaction, with the father or with the male, what have you, what was that like? We have to be willing to look inward and ask ourselves, do we have some implicit biases? Do we have some baggage that we're bringing, that's preventing us, from communicating and connecting, for building rapport and building trust that's welcoming, with this father, in a responsive, respectful way, or are we creating more and more distance, So that is something that we have to be mindful of, and we have to be willing to check ourselves at the door. And do we have male on staff? I mean, come on, y'all. Some of you think about when you go to the doctor. Some people are feel more comfortable talking to a female doctor than a male doctor. Males, same way. We might feel more comfortable talking to a male doctor as opposed to a female doctor. It all depends. But do we have that option? So thinking about looking at your hiring practices, do you have males on board? Do you have men of color on board? Do you have culturally appropriate linguistic materials available that actually speaks to me, that shows me, respect, at every level, So I think those are some things that we need to consider, as we move forward, within the agency. And sometimes, funding might impact, our services as well. And that's something that we should be mindful of. Just in summary, one of the things that we've talked about, and I think it's important, is for fathers to be involved in the child's life. I think we all can agree on that there are many barriers to them being able, to do this. So I'm hoping that these are some things that you are starting to think about, and that we're starting to look at how we can transition to how we can address them, so that they won't become barriers, that we can actually build bridges. So I want to, before we go to our next session, Maria, was there anything in the chat box that you wanted to lift up or amplify that I haven't touched upon yet?
There was a lot of good stuff in the chat. I do want to share, let me just see if I can scroll to it. So Wayne said, he shared a little story about his brother. I'm seeing if I can find it. Says, my brother and I grew up in the projects with a single mom. We both grew up to do well, him being in the millions range. He was married for 20 plus years and his wife decided to leave him. And he talks about how his brother had settled for only seeing his daughter every other weekend. And he encouraged his brother to pursue 50-50 custody. And he mentioned that he was surprised, or he didn't understand why he hadn't pursued that when he has lots of resources available to him. So I think that story just highlights how impactful and influential some of our beliefs are about fatherhood, right? Like this person had lots of resources to pursue 50-50 custody, and it sounds like was eventually able to get it, but he just hadn't gone for it because he didn't understand how important his role was, or he didn't. I don't know, Wayne, maybe you want to pipe in and share if I haven't covered your point properly, but.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so basically, I mean, when his wife left, he was in the process. I mean, we didn't get to where things were separated yet. But he called me up crying while the kid's in the shower. That's the last time I'm going to hear that, other than every other weekend. And I asked him, why the hell do you believe that? He goes, well, that's the way it is. And he had every resource available to him, and he still thought that way. And I said, there's no reason you shouldn't be a 50-50 split. So they got a 50-50 split in the divorce. They had to stay in the same school district. The kid, I mean, she's grown now. She's in college. She's going specializing in international business, speaks 3 languages. So success can still happen, and will happen more likely with the dad involved in a positive way. But as dads, we just totally give up because we've been trained that way. And I mean, I fought for my son. I raised him from the time he was 5 all the way up to adulthood. But most men don't even think they stand a chance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I noticed some folks were commenting things about that in the chat as well, that, feeling like the courts are going to default to moms, those kinds of things. So there are quite a few barriers.
Oh, man.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say thank you, Wayne, for sharing your testimony, your story with us. And I agree with the comments, that fortunately for me, I had the resources to fight for custody, to fight for a 50-50, to fight for visitation, et cetera. And I knew my rights. And unfortunately, we have to remove or help to unlearn the fact that people think that fathers don't think that they have any rights, that they don't have any power, when they actually have a lot of power. And we also have to address, I don't want to get too far ahead, like I love what Alicia said again about we have to, child support needs to be de-weaponized. And Andrew had mentioned how that, participation, dismissal of fathers' participation as being important has been a toxic fact for decades, but we do see that changing now. So, I think with the work that you all are doing and the conversation that we're having now, changing the narrative is so critical as we move forward. So, Maria, I'm gonna toss it back to you.
Yeah, I think, maybe we're hopefully seeing a shift away from just seeing dads as the provider, the source of money, to recognizing that they are important in so many other areas of the child's life.
May I throw one more thing out there?
Sure.
Just Dwayne again.
Mhm.
One of the things that Kim added, when our agency promoted dads to take a child to school day, some of the moms complained that it wasn't fair. Asked when we were going to have moms take a child to school day. When our fatherhood program started, everybody wanted to know where the motherhood program was. I don't know about you, but they're included in every program.
Mhm.
I thought at first. And we have one now, and that's great. I think they should have one. But it wasn't about so much about, oh, yay, finally something for the dads.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot to unpack here, right? Like we could spend several hours more than this training has allotted just talking about attitudes, right? Around moms and dads and culture and all of that. Yeah, there's so much there. Thank you all for sharing. Alicia, did you have something you wanted to add? I saw your hand was up at some point, but
No, I shared enough in the chat, but I'm really passionate around the idea of how, child support is used and the way that it's very divisive in separating families and dads' ability to do what is most important, and that is spend time, because children do not remember the items that you've purchased. They remember that the times that they've spent with either parent, but mostly when you talk about a father, those are the things that they remember. And I hope that we will get to a place where it is important to financially take care of your children, but it is even more important to enforce time spent, to
Mhm.
enforce that, fathers are given that equal opportunity outside of the relationship to be a father.
Yeah. And I think that's what we saw a lot in the last section, right? We see that in the research borne out that when dads are involved, when they play with their kids, when they're talking with their kids, that those are the things, that contribute to all those positive outcomes we saw. All right, so I want to make sure we have enough time to get into this last section, because we have talked about rationale, we have talked about barriers, but I want to talk a little bit about strategies. And as I talk through this section, I want you to think about what strategies or action steps you might be able to take within your own organization. If we have time, I would love to hear from you some of the things that you all have done in your organizations, whether they've worked or not, to help involve fathers, so we can all kind of learn from each other there. So first, taking a posture of presuming that fathers are highly interested in their children's lives and want to do a good job with parenting. I think you all have kind of been alluding to this, right? The attitude that we bring to the table is really important. So coming to the table assuming that dads want to parent and they want information and they want to be involved. We can also define our target male population. So thinking about, who does our program wish to involve? Is it fathers of the infants that we serve? Is it partners of the mothers that we serve? Fathers in the community, adolescent fathers, incarcerated fathers, or another population? Are we looking at biological fathers or father figures? So just being clear and defining who it is that we are looking to involve. Next, communicate. We want to communicate directly with fathers, including non-resident fathers, and then extend personal invitations to them to participate. Give them warm welcomes and greet them by name when we are working with them. And in cases where there's tension between fathers or between parents, sharing information about the importance of the father's involvement in the baby's life can become an incentive for mothers to focus their attention on the well-being of the child rather than on the couple's relationship problems. So that's one possible way to try to break down some of that maternal gatekeeping that that we've discussed. And then assess. So we can do a formal self-assessment of our program, or we can do more informal and just learn what fathers want and offer it. Pay attention to dad's needs. We can consider time. So we may need to adjust our program schedules to meet fathers' needs depending on work schedules or their availability. And also thinking about what moments of opportunity are there when fathers are especially motivated. Perhaps immediately after baby's birth, a father might be especially interested in participating with our program. We also need to think about our environment. So in this pandemic world, that may not be them coming into your office. And if you're a home visitor, that might not have been the case ever, but we can still think about the environment and what surrounds our work. So do we have, we already talked about male staff. Do we have materials, posters? I recently heard about a fatherhood initiative with Connecticut WIC, and they talked about how they didn't even have a field in their management information system to capture dad's name. So that's an example of like an environment or a systems thing that we need to address. So we need to make sure that our program is structured to be welcoming to dads. We can also do staff training. We can look at a number of different things. So we can do training in cultural humility. We've already touched on how there might be different attitudes about fatherhood and masculinity in different cultures. We can do training on our own implicit bias. We can also look at dealing with those cases of conflict in relationships. So if a mother is reluctant to involve the father, we can make sure our staff are trained to further investigate whether that resistance is based on fear and safety concerns, or is it relationship issues? Is this a case of domestic violence, or is this based on her own resentment or anger towards the father of her child because of unmet expectations or disappointments? We mentioned our materials, making sure we have materials created for fathers, that we're offering resources to achieve parenting and related goals. We can make sure that we're recognizing and reinforcing the contributions of fathers, finding out and responding to fathers' individual circumstances. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we can collaborate with other providers to help address identified needs. So if we are establishing some good communication and some good relationships with fathers, we might be starting to identify some of their needs. And so we want to make sure we have folks to refer to. So let me take a second to check in with the chat, because I would love to hear from you. There are other strategies that your agency has used to help involve fathers.
While you're doing that, Maria,
Yes.
I think it's Claudia, who mentioned, I think it was Claudia, that mentioned that a lot of programs are, focusing on from a deficit model and not a strength-based approach. And that's something that, we need to look at as we move forward. Are we, dispelling myths, or are we, like spewing, sharing what some of the strengths are, having fathers, males engaged, amplifying those voices, not what's wrong, but what's strong. I like to say in many of our work. And then also the importance of engaging father advocates. One of the attendees have lifted that up, how that has been, successful as well. So those are just some of the things that I saw in the chat box that I wanted to lift up for everyone.
Yeah, thank you. That would be another great place to do some training, right? Is in a strength-based approach. I see from Wayne, I think my local DSS looks at the dad's program as a pet project and not important for the most part. So that speaks to maybe we need to address our own attitudes and implicit bias first, so that we start with a good foundation of everybody truly being bought in and being on board. Yeah. Thank you all. So we only have a few minutes left. So I just want to take a minute to let you think about, were there any strategies that you all heard about from either us or from your colleagues of things that you want to take as an action step, as a next kind of step for you? I'm also going to be sharing some resources in a minute And that will, perhaps that might be an action step too, is to review some of those resources. We know that this isn't easy work. It's really important. And the most important thing in engaging men and fathers is providing respectful services with compassion, just like any other target audience that you're looking to serve. It's just, okay. It sounds like some folks had some fatherhood initiatives or, male involvement group before the pandemic, family bonding. And so maybe there's a chance here to kind of rethink, how can we get back to that? After the pandemic, it kind of threw everything off, but what can we do? Should we try to go back to that? Should we try to do a virtual version of that? Should we look into a new thing? Yeah, Claudia says, one piece is really working and being flexible with families, so fathers and father figures can be part of services from the start, including assessment, etc. Yes. Being available for dads. And Nancy said, will this recording be shared? Yes, so the recording and the slide deck will be shared via email after. Okay, so I have a number of resources for you. We're going to drop them in the chat. We can probably get them in the email that's sent out to you as well. I've got some websites that have quite a few different things as far as information for dads, information for programs. And then there's also a good article from the University of Rochester that helps you. It's got some good checklists and self-assessment sort of things, so that if you're looking to include fathers more, you can check out those resources. Okay.
Just another resource, I know it's not on the slide here, but I think it was Eric who lifted up in the chat box that mediation. If you have the resources or the tools necessary to explore mediation, with both parents, and focusing on what's the well-being of the child, and not having these conversational silos, but what's important, what's in the best interest of the child, and having those involved putting their interests second. So if you have the resources available, perhaps mediation might be something that you want to offer in your menu of services as well.
Lisa mentioned in the chat, when I'm given a new family to work with, I very rarely see a father, and the moms are not willing to discuss any involvement with the dad. So Lisa, I think my strategy in that situation, if you have the resources, the time and the ability to, would be really to focus on building a good rapport with your families, really working on some good communication skills so that you start to build some rapport and trust, and then sharing with them the importance of the father being involved. So trying to help them understand it's for the well-being of the child to involve the father. And that it's not quite so much about the relationship, but I think you've got to start with that baseline of trust in that relationship between you and the family. Okay, so I believe we do have an evaluation for today. Maggie, do you want to share any more about that? I also want to acknowledge that it's Father's Day coming up, so I want to say happy Father's Day to everybody, including you, Stan.
I love that, Maria. Yes, we tried to intentionally schedule this webinar in June for Father's Day, which I forgot to note at the beginning, but thank you. Yes, so after today, we received a couple questions in the chat. After today's session, I will be sending a follow-up email to everybody that registered for today's event. So even if people couldn't stay for the whole thing, or you came in late, it will have a link to the recording, which we'll make available to all participants. Follow-up resources, as Maria mentioned, so those links will be in there, as well as a link to a survey from UAlbany. We partner with the Center for Human Services Research to do data collection. So not only will it give our speakers some feedback, but it'll ensure that we can continue to offer these webinars monthly. I want to just say a huge thank you to Maria and Stan. There is comments and love and thanks pouring in through the chat box. I think this is a very timely, and there's a lot of energy around this conversation, which I'm loving to see. So hopefully everybody appreciated the opportunity to just kind of interact and chat today. Yeah. So thank you just again, thank you. And we will be in touch with resources. I don't know if Stan or Maria, you have final remarks.
I just wanted to say thank you everybody for participating. It's always so much fun when folks are really engaged and passionate about the topic and when we get to have more of a dialogue. So I appreciate everybody sharing so many resources and stories and anecdotes in the chat. That was great.
Yes, I just want to thank you all for the opportunity. Thank you, Maggie, and everyone, for your participation, and happy Father's Day to all the papas out there, the uncles, and my contact information, my email address is in the chat box in case anyone wanted to reach out to me. So, but just thank you very much for all that you do. Stay safe.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good Tuesday.
Yep. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. We'll be in touch. Thanks. Bye-bye.